So let's begin. Good morning to all of you. Welcome here to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City and our Summer Forum Speaker Series for today. It's a beautiful Sunday. It is August 11th, 2024. And in just a second, 1 minute, I'll introduce our speaker. But before I do, I want to introduce Nancy Moos, who's going to come forward to light the chalice and have a reading.
Well, this is tall for me. I'll get on my tiptoes. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nancy. Good. This is a quote from Braiding Sweetgrass with Robin Walls Kemmerer. She writes about the three sister crops, corn, beans, and squash, and their interrelationships. The way of the three sisters reminds me of one of the basic teachings of our people. The most important thing each of us can know is our unique gift and how to use it in the world. Individuality is cherished and nurtured because in order for the whole bunch to flourish, each of us has to be strong in who we are and carry our gifts with conviction so that they can be shared with others. Being among the sisters provides a visible manifestation of what a community can become when its members understand and share their gifts. In reciprocity, we fill our spirits as well as our bellies.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, it's my honor this morning to introduce Utah State Senator Luz Escamilla, who has lived and is living the American dream. Born in Mexico, she moved to Utah and earned her Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Marketing in 2000 and her Master's in Public Administration in 2005 from the University of Utah. In 2008, Luz was elected to the Utah State Senate, becoming the first Latina elected to the Utah State Senate and the first immigrant elected to the Utah State Legislature. Her district, the 10th State Senate District, covers Salt Lake City's Westside and West Valley City and nearby communities. She was elected again in 2008 and then in 2012, 2016, 2020, and happily this year she is a candidate for re-election. Luz has received many honors and awards in her public service. Since 2013, she has served as Zion Bank's Vice President for its community development efforts and Director of its Business Resource Center and Marketing Manager for serving Utah's Hispanic Latino communities. Today, State Senator Luz Escamilla will speak on this topic, Salt Lake City's West Side. Diversity is our strength. So let's welcome State Senator Escamilla to the Summer Forum.
Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me? All right, perfect. I don't want to get too close to the mic. It is a beautiful Sunday, and I appreciate Nancy's beautiful quotes, and your words were beautiful. I first want to thank, of course, Dr. Tim Chambless. He doesn't need an introduction. Everybody knows him. It's always an honor to get a request from him, and as a former student of his, I can't say no. So we just needed to make sure it worked in the schedule when he connected with us during the session, I think it was. And I said, after session, we want to do this. And it's not my first time visiting your congregation. I did have a little PTSD moment a minute ago because I was here during the mayoral race. Some of you were here, and that was in 2019, and it was very, very, very brutal. 9 months of a campaign and an election, and very happy to be here today again with you guys. And this time, thanking obviously the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake for letting me be part of your Summer Forum series. I get to see who your speakers are, incredible humans that are contributing to our state and our city. When I saw the title and the topic, in the midst of what we are seeing right now in the world and in our country and in our state, the first thing that came to my mind was hope. I mean, talking about diversity, I know that for some of my colleagues, unfortunately, it has a connotation of being negative, and how do we remove it from our conversations, from our dictionary? I think they're eager to remove those words and not make them even possible for us to talk about them. And that happened this session. And I want us to be clear that in my 16 sessions that I've been elected, this has been probably the most difficult and negative session I've ever seen. And I've been through recessions, 2008, 9, housing crisis. We've been through pandemic, COVID, and then suddenly is an attack on humans. It's an attack on our trans kiddos. It's an attack on immigrants or anyone that slightly looks different or sounds different. And it's been hard because the first thing that happens is you lose hope. And being amongst people like all of you that are obviously conscious and deeply care for your community, that's why you're here. You build community through this type of engagements. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's important to be reminded that without hope, 2024 looks very, very scary. If I went back into looking into what hope means, and one of the definitions that really struck me was hope is an optimistic state of mind that is based on an expectation of positive outcomes with respect to events and circumstances in one's life or the world at large. You usually think about hope in a very personal way. You're hopeful for something. I mean, you're hopeful. We have kiddos. My husband, by the way, is here, Juan Carlos, and one of our kiddos, Sol. We have little kids. We have young adults and older adults in our family, and we see there are different stages of hope and what they're looking for. But then I really want to think about hope in terms of our community and how we combine all of that individual hope and come out thinking about the hope of many that are right now struggling between whether they're going to have enough to pay the rent. And that's very reflective on my district, right? People that are one paycheck away from homelessness or not having enough for milk, diapers, things that are very just basic necessity that maybe we take for granted because we have some level of stability, financial stability. But then there's also when it's a very dark place and we are now struggling with social media and other things and the just a negative wording out there, the negative way of communicating amongst ourselves. So when we talk about changing demographics, and in our state specifically, I at one point was a director for the Office of Ethnic Affairs, and former Governor John Huntsman was the governor, and it was the very first time they had a whole office become a division. That we have offices of Asian Affairs, Hispanic, Latino Affairs, Black Affairs, and Pacific Islander Affairs. And I was a director for all those offices, assisting the governor, a man of vision. And if you know, former Ambassador John Huntsman, he was a man that really had us in mind is welcoming the world to Utah. And I appreciated that, hence why I work for a Republican governor. I was very young, right after finishing my MPA at the U, which was an amazing experience, by the way. I wanted to be part of this welcoming effort. How do we integrate communities? How do we make so everyone succeeds? And I clearly believe that then Governor Huntsman had that vision. But that's when I started seeing very real, organized ways of rejecting people. And it was very clear we were implementing the driving privilege card for individuals that couldn't, were out of status, but we still realize it's a public safety issue. And many of these policies make sense for the rest of the people, regardless of how you feel about immigration, just because you want people that are legally tested, trained, insured on the roads. That's what I want when I'm driving, right? So it just made sense from a policy perspective. And I started to see how people sometimes really feel about the unknown or the other. Anything that slightly looks different. And this sentiment of rejection, or how do I protect myself from the other? And as Utah continues to change, and it's not only happening on the West Side, it's happening everywhere. There's multiple reasons, and there's incredible people that do demographic studies at the University of Utah. We have the Gardner Institute that's known for their data analysis with incredible people. Dr. Pam Perlick, a good friend, has been, just telling us what's going to happen. I mean, this is just what it's going to be. To see that, and we're getting there, right? In the last 20 plus years, you've seen those changes mostly happening by birth rate. So these changing demographics are U.S. citizens by birth, which is unique to a lot of the rhetoric that we hear outside. In the state of Utah, or specifically in my district, Northwest Quadrant of Salt Lake, my district's about 60% West Valley, and all Magna. Those numbers are now, those cities are, in the case of West Valley and Salt Lake City, certainly shifting that way, are what we call minority-majority cities. West Valley is, and Ogden. So those are the two cities we have in Utah that are already minority-majority cities. And Senate District 10, specifically, being the most diverse district. But what you see is there is the representing of those districts that are so diverse. Does that actually translate to actual electoral participation? And that is one I want to communicate with all of you, because we are in a unique year. And we see so much of the presidential election, which is, don't take me wrong, right? It's so critical. But what happens down the ballot, and what happens to those local races, and when the outcomes of not having electoral participation that truly reflects and that, diverse representation at our local government, state government, really at the end, whatever's happened nationally becomes very isolated to what's happening in Utah in some instances. And so I, in this last legislative session, I mentioned some of those issues that were, I'm very, I'm optimistic. We were, Ben McAdams and myself, former, Congressman McAdams, we served together in the Senate. We were at this event talking, and he said, being a Democrat in Utah is being extra optimistic. And I was like, yeah, that's true. That's a nice way of putting it. But at the same time, we also know how to count, right? I mean, in order to succeed in the legislature as a legislator and pass legislation, which I've been very blessed to be able to do that, you know how to count. And I'm also very realistic. So I'm pragmatic when it comes to policy and try my best to bring forth good policies. And we were just talking to one of them being childcare, which is now my number one priority legislation. But I didn't see this year how bad it was going to be. I'll just be very sincere. The anti-DEI movement, I'm going to say it caught me by surprise, which doesn't mean that I'm completely unrealistic and, living in a bubble. I just didn't think everyone was going to jump this wagon and be like, yes, this is terrible for our community. How do you articulate the richness of all the diverse voices and all the opportunities of inclusiveness, right? Because it was an anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion bill. It was not only an anti-diversity, it was anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion. Those three words alone are important because they're not the same. And just the combined effort, it's mean, right? I mean, how do I explain this to my children it's a hard thing to talk about and not be like, it's just mean, in a very simple, kindergarten level conversation. And so I went back to an article I participated in that was published in the Desert Magazine about elections last year, right? So on the off-year elections, it was municipal elections, local government elections. And my article was on approaching election day and diversity on the electoral voting. And I wrote, and so I'll quote some of that stuff because it resonates a year later into where we are now. And I wrote, we have an obligation to ensure our democratic process and the wells of resources and information are fully accessible as possible in a culturally and linguistically appropriate manner for all to participate. Ironically, under the current state law, not anymore. Just telling that a year ago, I was writing this article as best practices in how do we engage everyone in America to participate in the beauty of being an American, which is, as a new American, I value and treasure this opportunity to vote and participate and be elected in my case. I can no longer say this in our current state statute because we're no longer allowed to do this unless there's a federal law that supersedes, which in many instances there is. When it comes to healthcare and education, Title VI of the Office for Civil Rights supersedes the state law. But the fact that the state takes a stand in statute, it's heartbreaking. So I'm looking back, I'm like, wow, reflecting. Civic engagement is a fundamental machine that facilitates healthy two-way communication between citizens and their elected leaders who oversee our government. Their reciprocal dialogue, grown out of civic engagement, allow for inclusive and indispensable, I love that word, indispensable public discourse on policy issue from across the board. What's to me unique is the lack of understanding that when you stop this two-way communication, you're only making your policies, your state, your city, your community, just instead of going forward, you're going backwards. But what happens when a portion of the electoral doesn't engage, as I was saying, then you have insufficient democratic access and participation. Talking about civic engagement at a very basic level requires us to take a short trip through history because in our case, and in this very young country that we are, the evolution of voter participation is not that old. And that's what's even more scary because we're repeating history. We're not that long ago, it just happened. If you think about our voter participation in our nation's history, including the enfranchisement, getting the African Americans and other minority groups to actually participate, and then now seeing intentional decisions made to suppress that vote within a 100-year timeline. What's happening? And collectively, what can we do? So I took us back a little bit to 1870, right? Obviously, the 15th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which guaranteed the right to vote, could not be denied based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. This amendment came as a complement, obviously, the 13th, 14th Amendments, which abolished slavery and guaranteed citizenship, respectively, to African Americans. Women, took us 50 more years, right, will not receive the right to vote until ratification of the 19th Amendment of 1920. So again, not that long ago, a 100-year time frame, 104 years for women. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights of 1965 are some of the most important pieces of civil rights legislation in U.S. history, deeply expanding voter registration and voter participation. In 2013, just very recently again, the U.S. Supreme Court decision, which was a Shelby County versus Holder, declared sections 4B of the voter rights unconstitutional, enabling numerous mechanisms of voting suppression across the nation that make it more difficult for minority communities to participate. So 2013 puts us back, right? Here we are in this history piece. When minority communities engage and participate in electoral politics, the bones of our democracy get stronger, as it fosters a more comprehensive representation in government. Diverse input allows us to better confront our unique challenges through the meaningful policies that embrace inclusion and our shared ideals of prosperity. Because it may look different for all of us, but at the end, it's very communal. Welcoming all voices to the table can also assist us in our collective journey towards a more even playing field by addressing systemic inequalities and social determinants of health. Who better to advance policy decisions on these issues than people that actually have been disproportionately impacted by them? As our demographics continue to shift, it becomes more important to foster representation for our children and ensure they can identify with leaders who make them feel like it's possible to dream. Go back to this word of hope, of dreams. It's not a cliche, it's not to sound cheesy, because that's, I think, what's lacking now. It is truly dark for many, many people. In getting instances of hope through incredible leaders or, winnings or pieces that are happening, they give hope. I mean, the Olympics can be a sense of hope, right? Like we all get excited. We're going to be welcoming the world in 10 years. And I'm thinking inside of me, holy cow, it's a way of welcoming the world at this pace, right? But again, this opportunities provide us those mechanisms of to feel like it's possible to still dream and have hope. A fully engaged community is a fully vested community. When people talk about integration, they say, "Oh, these new people, they don't want to be part of America." It's like, have you even allowed them to be part of America? It makes it really hard. It's a two-way, relationship. Empowering people to participate in the process that decide who represents them gives them a sense of belonging and hope. Minority voices and communities that have developed an incredible sense of resiliency, which is a unique thing, and it's something that has made America incredibly strong, is that every time there's a new wave of commerce, which is what we see historically in this nation, they come with a sense of resiliency because they're coming to this, American dream, to this hope, because they're running away from something really, really bad. And in this case, when they have that sense of resiliency, they may be currently struggling. They find optimism amid a divided nation right now. In many instances, attacks their very sense of who they are, even though they're being attacked. And you put podcasts, you're on TikTok, you're on social media, and even now it's everything, right? It's collectively. So imagine you're in the other side feeling all those attacks. And I feel more concerned about younger people, our children, our youth. That's the future of this country. I mean, we adults, can think, okay, what's next for me in the next 20, 30 years? But what happens to our economy long term? And by long term, I mean 30, 40 years, 50 years. Who's going to carry the weight to continue to have the America that we all love and want to continue to see thriving? It's going to be our children. That's the future workforce. So I sometimes wonder, when we don't invest on childcare, on early childhood education, on our own public education systems, are we missing the bigger picture? Because we all collectively are going to need that workforce. For many, time is, you did your part. So now what's going to happen next? And to me, that's where this sense of children, of families, of kiddos is like, if you don't invest in them, then you're not going to have any return on investment because you're not investing anything. Carrying the disproportionate weight of poverty, homelessness, negative physical and mental health outcomes, environmental hazards, we're very familiar with them. Think about the Westside and all the air inequality pieces, or other social determinants of health are heavy structural burdens that do not encourage confidence and trust. So when I think about my district, and my colleagues know, I think about hunger. Because in many instances, that's the number one priority right now. Where is dinner coming from tonight? Do I need to take food from school back home? Because that may be the only meal available. And that is a reality in the west side of Salt Lake City today. Why food during summer, it's so critical. Because that is potentially the only meal they're going to get. Childcare, #1 crisis in Utah, hands down. I know people, housing clearly, and to me, they kind of like come in the same way. Because you can't have stability when there's not financial stability for the very, very basic needs. Housing being one of them, but you cannot work if you don't have childcare. And when we're seeing trends within Salt Lake School District of young women, 16-year-old high school kiddos dropping out of high school, not because of teen pregnancy, not because of gang-related activity, not because of academic problems, because they need to take care of their siblings so parents can work. That's, I mean, not in the US in 2024, but that is our reality. People are making decisions between that. I mean, and by the way, it's either that or the whole family experiences homelessness, because what are you going to do with a 2-year-old baby? And now policies that are limiting ability to access reproductive health in a way that is appropriate for families in a decision between their providers and that family. I mean, by all means, this, again, are being disproportionately impacted. So how do we encourage confidence and trust in these future generations when our own policies are, sending them the other way? So childcare, again, in the crisis that we're facing with housing, with the environment, I mean, please, environmental social justice is real. Climate change, you can feel it, everyone. Energy, I mean, our dependence on, whatever dependency we have on very, very dirty energy. Again, all of this, yes, happening, but if the basic of childcare, so I can go to work and know that my children are safe, and my kids are in school, the ones that have to be in school, and my tiny ones are in a high quality childcare, so I can focus on work, be productive, go back, pay my taxes, have a place to live. I mean, it's all connected. And I'll tell you this is as the biggest disappointment for me in this last session, and it was, tears on the attacks on our trans kids, the very, very few of them, super targeted. Again, just mean. There's no other way but mean. And then the attack on, the anti-DEI stuff, but not being able to pass not a single bill investing on childcare is, to me, where, what's the excuse? Nothing. The state of Utah invested zero, even though we face a $400 million cliff because we lost all those federal funds after COVID. $400 million were lost in last year on childcare alone, and the state invested zero. But there was not enough people calling. There was not enough people saying this is urgent, because the people that are in the urgent need are working in survival mode. So the ask is, who needs to make the phone calls? Who needs to demand from this legislature action? And I'm, everywhere I go, collectively begging for help. I will. I'm not going to let this go. I did a lot for, we were able to cover all kiddos now in Utah after 5 years of working on my bill. And I'm back on childcare. It's not going to work if people don't have a way of leaving their kids in a safe place. So, more and more of our population identifies as part of a racial and ethnic minority. And again, with all those social determinants of health that come collectively to those communities, and they are the nation's primary growth. It is clear that they will be the future workforce and leaders in our nation. It is in our best interest of all to create a space where they can thrive and fully participate in our democratic system. Let's address the issues that matter to them. Exercise a healthy two-way communication process of civic engagement by including them in the process in a culturally and linguistically appropriate manner. Working around current statutes that we will be working really hard to remove, Because now we just put another extra massive set of barriers and walls, literally, with this bill of anti-DEI. And, but in the same time, strengthening our democracy with true representation. There's a really good quote by Martin Luther King Jr. It says, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." If we become silent, that's it. So our democracy awaits for all of us to participate, but also to advocate for others. I think it's and certainly my call. One of the things that we're seeing a lot now, and I know it's a difficult conversation, is this very anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-asylee sentiment. It's a very complex issue, and please know that even trying to articulate, the word, that people using different words interchangeably, they're not the same terms. We've seen it with our, everything from our governor to other leaders that are, that people that I personally know, and I know they're not, they're not mean people, they don't want to hurt people, but it's hurtful. So the first task is at least get educated at a very minimum of someone. Get you an immigration attorney to at least explain basics. Some of this stuff is, to me, there's no excuse at those levels for people to use terms that are not correct. Just completely wrong. There may be other terminology. People say, well, that's, the liberals calling it this. I'm like, no, there's some stuff that is just right or wrong. There's not a in between. So that's another one where you're, of course, in an election years, even though we're not a border state, we've seen, obviously, there's been a lot of influx. And that is a reality. And we also need to be very open on having those conversations and how do we address the humane approach to this, which I think is what we collectively today here as a group agree, and do it in an orderly fashion. But it makes it hard when it's just utilized for political purposes. It just makes it really hard because it's not a policy conversation anymore. You're literally walking into, this is a political conversation. Let's see who can make the other hurt more. And that there's no beginning. And I'll tell you this, I've had countless conversations with in this case, the president of the Senate and the speaker on this conversation, of how we talk about the Utah way. How do we bring the Utah way on this? Right? I'm like, I can't wait to see it because it's certainly not there. So I constantly begging for the Utah way. And I said, look, it's not because I'm an immigrant. It's because I know it's needed. We can't afford to go that route and be Texas or Florida. Anyone wants to, I travel with a passport there. If I ever have to go to a meeting in those states, bring the passport with me because I will be, it is serious, right? Is that what you want from me? So should I go to the Capitol with my passport now? Is that what we want to become? Because we're not that far. And that's what's real. And it's a sense of desperation. Because for some people, it may just be more disconnected. What does that mean? Well, may not mean anything to you because you look very different. It may mean a lot to some of us. And can we have that conversation? And in response to, all the information that's coming the way to maybe the more right-wing conservatives of 50 million people, I'm like, oh, where are they? Because they claim there's 1 million in Utah. I'm like, we're 3 million people in the state. Let's just, some of this stuff, can we then have the Utah way of removing some of this political rhetoric and have a policy conversation? It's going to look different than Texas and Florida, please. It is going to look different than California, fine. But it's going to be our way, but let's not let anyone else control how that looks like because it should be Utah, right? That's the whole idea of Utah way. We're Utah, okay. Then let's be weird Utah and actually fix the problem because that will make us weird to the rest of the country. I'm asking for that. We need people to articulate how much of a need there is for that. And again, it's not to say, oh, it has to be open border. No one is claiming that. If you actually have a real conversation, it's about pragmatic policy operation issues, because there's some logistics issues that need to be addressed, 100%. And, our local governments are feeling it. The state is feeling it. It's a federal issue, 100%. The federal government has failed. Federal government, last time I checked, actually has executive, legislative, and judicial branches. So it's not the president's fault. I'm like, oh, suddenly we just have one branch of government when it comes to this conversation, but when it comes to something else, now we do have different branches of government. No, let's call it what it is. Yes, immigration is 100% federal issue. States are now dealing with the aftermath of a failed immigration policy, but that requires the three branches of government, both at the federal level, state level, and in instances, local government now, combining efforts to address some of these issues. But I'm not going to let Congress get away with it for not passing comprehensive immigration reform in 80 years. I don't know. I mean, last time there was some sort of something was in 1989. I was in third grade. I mean, what's happening? And how do we get away with them feeling so comfortable, feeling like, oh, just life is so hard? Really? I don't know. I sent you to Congress to represent me and interest of my community. You're certainly not doing your job, right? And please call me in if I'm not doing my job when we're fighting there, right? It's important. And maybe there's time for new people to come in. I'm all for solutions, but stop the nonsense, right? Let's bring the Utah way and why this is important. So I do want to, share it's Sunday, and, I had my family, we participate and we have services on Sunday, and I teach a Sunday school class in my congregation. And there's been lately, I will say since session, because everything to me has a unique meaning. And I feel those messages coming from my own church leaders about, just dissonance and hatred, and how that's not being Christ-like. So I tend to share that when I'm teaching my class about loving your enemies and whatever you define as your enemies, right? Because if you think about the ultimate hardest thing to do is to love your enemies. It's hard. Because it's not tolerate your enemies, it's loving them. And in the Bible, it's very direct to love your enemies. And I think, I've spent a lot of time with one of my favorite congregations to spend time in my district is the Buddhist temple, the Wat Lao Buddha Lam Temple in West Valley. My family and I are regular visitors of that congregation. They've been one of the most incredible, empowering, and heartfelt experience for my family, to learn how people are able to love and to support and welcome people from different belief systems, religions, groups, whatever. If you want to feel welcome in a way, please come to this temple. And it's beautiful, by the way. It's one of the largest temples in the country for these Buddhist congregations. And they build it from the bottom up, right? So literally piece of land, let's build it together. And now it's just gorgeous temple. And we've spent the last couple of years as a family, we wanted to teach our children about the importance of understanding how love looks, translates into many, many ways of service. And one of the things that they teach in Buddhism is literally loving your enemy. And this just control and exercise to do that. And my husband and I spend a lot of time with Ajahn, which is their main monk, because it's also a monastery. So in Utah, we actually have a monastery and a temple. It's beautiful if you get a chance again. And talking to Ajahn about how to, they've been feeling some hate coming their way from their own neighbors. I mean, this is sad. And, I put on my, Senate hat, and I'm like, I'm there, it's called West Valley, the police, it's like, this is going to end. And just to see him in this calmness and this just way of talking about welcoming them. He wants to, eat with them and share with them, and how he wants them to feel like this is their home too, their temple. And I'm like, holy cow, this is hard, because they're fully attacking you and your beliefs and the way you dress and the way you look. He's like, no. In Buddhism, we learn about loving everyone and anyone, no matter what they're doing to us. And again, in that sense, I want to just share a couple of remarks respectfully to all of you, again, coming from a more very personal place of my Sundays, of what we do at home. But this is it's a talk that I was teaching in at church, and it's by one of the apostles in our church, and it's talking more about loving your enemies. And in this case, it was one of the former presidents of the church, and he says, loving our enemies and our adversaries is not easy. Most of us have to reach that stage of love and forgiveness. And President Gordon B. Hinckley said, observed, it requires a self-discipline almost greater than we are capable of. But it must be essential, for it is part of the Savior's 2 great commandments. Love the Lord thy God, and to love thy neighbor as thyself, which is in Matthew, in the Bible, 22:37 and 39. And it must be possible, because in Matthew 7:7, he also taught us, the Lord, ask and it shall be given to you, seek and ye shall find. So I have hope, and I'm not going to lose hope, because that's what keeps me every day to go back to the Capitol when things get really, 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 really sad and dark, is this idea that I will continue to seek and ask from the Lord, because we need all the help we can get. And this opportunity to, and I was sharing this where we were talking with Ben McAdams and myself at this place together, that knowing that we all are children of God give us a divine vision of the worth of all others and the will and ability to rise above prejudice and racism. Again, where I go and congregate on Sundays, I'm being taught to do that. And I'm translating this. I did get a lot of pushback, and Ben and I got some pushback for having this type of conversations, but I truly believe we need to get to connect with people at this level. And it may sound different because we may have a different belief system, but at the end, it's about human connection. And I know in our case, in our family, we're learning that through our friends in the Buddhist temples, with the community that we serve and that we congregate, we enjoy as our neighbors in the parks where our kids play with, that I know is possible, is because of the strength of diversity, that we can feel an opportunity to learn from others. So to conclude, I will share this great quote by Robert Kennedy. He said, so think about timing. It's Robert Kennedy. Ultimately, America's answer to the intolerant man is diversity. The only way we can answer that intolerance is through diversity. So thank you for your time. I know we want to open for questions, if that's okay, Dr. Chambless.
Who has that first question? Okay, I think right over there. Okay.
Since they have passed the anti-DEI laws here in the state, what is being done to keep the numbers on how many minority populations are here, and like statistics, basically, like on poverty levels, education levels, all the things that influence minority populations and decisions made about them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll say this, there's tons of confusion on how to implement this. We are the first state to actually pass this full-blown anti-DEI legislation. So you've seen anti-DEI bills like in Florida on colleges. But what this bill did, and most people are not aware, is that this was not a higher education bill. at the end, it turned out to be a all government. So any government entity, political subdivisions, anything, plus K-12 and higher ed. So the implications are very big. So let me, and I'll say this because it's also important. The way the bill is drafted and the way it's written and now implementation is kind of like a nightmare because nobody understands a lot of this. So it doesn't necessarily preclude from engaging on data collection. The problem is how do you use the data or how that translates. But what we were telling the governor at this point in desperation was, as an example in public health, which I believe is where the biggest impact is going to be. Because it's just if in your programs addressing race and ethnicity becomes a critical piece of a conversation on public health. Because you have, for example, as an example, the number one example is sickle cell disease that affects 95% African Americans. If we remove race and ethnicity from that conversation, it's void. Like it doesn't. So there were I was able to put in we were able to add language to, for example, you obviously have the exceptions that are federal, like Title VI, Title IX, all the titles that the federal government already supersedes regardless whether they're in statute or not, but we wanted to put them in place and also if there was like an impact. So we're giving public health and government a year into implementation, but there are already many of them that are kind of like trying to see how that looks like. So to answer your question, that's the scary part, is how it's going to affect the actual data for us to make policy decisions. And I'll tell you what my biggest fear is, which we're seeing now in universities, unfortunately happening, is the overly zealous legal counsels on institutions that are like, no, we can take it further. No, I think the intent was to completely remove everything. So we're now protecting what is not even in statute of the overly zealous people that want to see even more. Because what's sad is not only the legislature. The unfortunate part is there's more players on this that actually want to see this diversity, equity, and inclusion completely removed. So it has been an interesting, for me personally, to see implementation of people. I'm like, why are you implementing more than what it is? Well, our legal counsel is recommending this. Your legal counsel is like, the legal counsel is not the elected official. That's not the intent of the bill and legislation, and that's not what statute says. So now we may have to now put, which is what I'm looking. It's like, do we need to now put consequences to people that are overtly doing it? I mean, right? So it's so unknown because no one else has what we have in the country, which is mind-blowing.
I think about the revolutionary cry, which was taxation without representation. And so we have areas of Utah that have huge minority populations that aren't receiving representation. I believe that education from the home all the way through school, but in school, if certain schools are not being offered the same things as easily as books and computers and after-school programs and all those things that help encourage children to learn and to participate more fully in their communities as they grow. Because some children are 5 years away from voting. What are we doing to educate these people? So taxation without representation, I think that is a cry we should have right now, And,
Question in the back.
Go here, and then we'll go here.
So in regards to what you just mentioned, I work for a higher ed enterprise, and I have seen the implementation of that Bill 261. I have to tell you, I'm more disagree, because you can have Title IX, Title VI, you get added federal and everything. Who is going to be added in the implementation of these rules? Because to me, I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed that we let it pass this bill, that nobody stopped them from going through, because the impact that it's going to have for minority children or even diverse children or that is not inclusion to be able to attend to schools. The implementation that is going to have about the bathrooms, how we use bathrooms, how we use everything, and where the money is going to go to allow the kids to go to school. And that's one of my major things. So I might be a minority that I got the opportunity to go to school, but our current generation that is coming, they're not going to have that opportunity because all of that is taken away with this bill.
So, and I'll say, I think higher ed, if you look at the bill itself, higher ed had a 9-month working process. And so the language related to higher ed in the section of the bill, that's their own section because they were separated. So you have higher ed 1, K-12, and then local government entities, all government entities. Higher ed did better, I think, because they had more time drafting it. This new thing of adding K-12 and local government, there's a history behind, a little bit of story behind it, so gross and related to some 2-3 people crazies over there. So it came at the end, like towards the beginning of the session. So, and as you know, that bill passed within 2 weeks. I mean, it was horrible. It was probably one of the loneliest times I felt as a senator. No one was standing with us. No one. And I said with us, mostly Democrats. Many of us that were taking death threats from out of state on this issue. We had a video when we did a press conference. It hit 11 million people, and the right wing crazies came after us. Our home addresses were distributed. I mean, it was horrible, and it was very lonely. And I've been very vocal to my own party and some of the more progressive groups that they left us alone. Like no one was there with us. I'll say that, and I'll say it again. And I don't think they recognize the implications that has just been described. This is a long-term implication of, all the work we've done to bring more minorities into accessing higher ed. You're basically going back 20, 30 years because the question is here, they now have created student success offices. I guess that's the wording they're using. And I've had conversations. We're meeting again with President Randall, met with Mortensen from Weaver. I've been very disappointed. I mean, I've said it to them in their faces. I'll say it publicly. Huge disappointment of the lack of leadership on higher ed. If someone has an understanding of the future should look like, because it's all data and demographics, should be higher ed. No one. They're like, well, it's life. We're gonna take it. So let me just so we will move in and maneuver. So is this? I'm like, are you for reals? So they were already implementing the bill before it even passed. I mean, before it was even the deadline. I mean, the implementation date. So to answer that, there's going to be implications on funding. So now higher ed again because they did well. So the first thing they protected, sports. And again, if that does not infuriate, and by the way, my background in terms of my family, my parents were professors back home. My mom has a PhD in chemical engineering. I come from, higher education as institutions of changing people's lives. Number one, we'll protect sports because, what's going to happen to our football team? They protect sports. Second, now obviously all the federal laws because, Title IX, Title whatever, 7. So, we can't lose all of our funding for research. They protect that. So everyone else that's not on those categories are indispensable. Or we can just toast with them. It's life. Biggest disappointment. So heartbreaking. Because for years we've been talking to higher ed and inclusiveness and bringing all the students and representing the state and the changing demographics, blah, 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 majority school districts now. And now these kids don't have a place to go that they can feel they belong. And I now bring my colleague, Representative Romero, and myself, we, at length, in the most uncomfortable ways, share how important the Center for Ethnic Student Affairs was for me as a student at the University of Utah. In 1996, again, I'm now telling you guys my age, because without that office, the outcomes could have been probably different. And out of those offices, you have former Senator Rose Romero, Senator Karen Kwan, Representative Angela Romero, myself. I mean, we've all come from those offices that gave us a sense of belonging. They were there for a reason, and they did their homework well because we are the product of those offices in collaboration with great academic professors and all of that. But those offices provided this safety, a sense of safety and belonging. That's what this is about. And it's heartbreaking because like, well, no, it shouldn't be like that. That is discriminatory. I'm like, no, everybody was welcome, by the way. We've had people that were from all communities. This was just not an exclusive. It's never been exclusive. Anyone is welcome in those offices. I've never seen an office say, no, not this. The Women's Resource Center, hello. So you can tell how frustrated I am about this issue, and I apologize. It's been hard, but we're going to continue to work. You know, we have expressed concerns. We are having meetings with the presidents. You know, the board is very new, the new higher education board, because this year we restructured the entire higher ed board. There's great people in the board. You know, Amanda Covington is the chair. It's a personal friend of mine. I love her. She knows how I feel about this. Our new commissioner of higher ed, that's just been appointed about 2 months ago. He's been in higher ed for years. He's an attorney, very, you know, responsive. But collectively, my heart broke. And I have to tell you, as a mother of a kid that's starting her sophomore year in college, I am so happy that she's at University of San Francisco. And she called me after the bill passed, and she said, "Mommy, I love you. I know you're a senator in Utah, and you work so hard. I am so happy I didn't end up attending the University of Utah." Because I was, you know, she wanted the U. That's where her mom went. But she's like, I would have been devastated. Because part of how she's now part of, you know, participating in her community at USF is through these activities of being a Latina. She's now an RA for a whole Latino program in their housing units, right? So I say that this is, again, a personal choice, and my daughter made her personal choice of where she was going to go to school. But when I was seeing this bill coming down, I'm like, wow, those are my kids. Like, I have kids that are, you know, college-age kids, and one of them that started the year before. So anyways, I know your timing, but I wanted to share that because in terms of this bill, there's more to go. So there will be more opportunities, I guess, to engage. And some of you that are in those worlds of higher ed, I know it's also scary because retaliation is real. And a lot of people were like, I'm so scared to come and speak. I mean, that's my job. That's my boss. And those diversity offices, they didn't know if they were going to have a job. So none of them could say anything, right, out of fear of retaliation. I don't blame them. But everybody else, it was very lonely during that fight. I'll say that. I know there's another question.
Thank you for coming, Senator. We appreciate it very much. The one glimmer of hope I've had this summer in Utah is the Utah Supreme Court's ruling on Count My Vote. And I know that your colleagues in the legislature are already planning some action, probably to make that invalid. I'm wondering, especially down ballot, how we can help that go forward, keep the momentum going, you know, lend our voices to the cause and see what we can do to get some action out of that ruling.
Great question. And you're right. So the devil's in the detail on some of this stuff. So 2 Supreme Court decisions, great decisions. By the way, this is not an ultra-liberal Supreme Court. Just like when people are like losing it, I'm like, dude, the governor appoints them, we confirm them in the Senate, right? So, this reaction of like the ultra-liberal, I'm like, have you seen who's in the Supreme Court? I'm like, oh, okay. Super interesting. So you realize just how unconstitutional, like how they went too far. So, but they're very upset. They are very, very upset. So if you think about the Better Boundaries laws, so that decision, both of them are about process, just to be very clear. Because, as soon as we get into this technical stuff. So those decisions were about process, and in the case of the Better Boundaries, it's process on any, ballot initiative. So it was about the ballot initiative process. So we need to be very vigilant because they're coming next session in just with all the eager to destroy more of those process and, doing legislatively, which we need to be very careful. On the one about, the injunction into the full abortion ban, that is, we're going to see probably a special session. I think I will say 95% guarantee we'll see it. And now, it's not going to be on the decision. This special session is going to be on weeks, right? Because Utah had an 18-week, so up to 18 weeks. So now, after the injunction, they stopped that bill, which was SB 201 or 270 maybe, which passed in 2022. So, this bill passed a while ago. It was an injunction all the way to the Supreme Court of Utah. Now it's like, hey, send it back to the smaller court, district court for review. But what the legislature is trying to do now, my understanding from what we've discussed with leadership, is they're trying to now pass legislation to bring it down to 6 weeks. So the special session will be on weeks, not necessarily on the decision, which is an injunction on the harm that full-blown ban potentially could have on patients, which is real. It's scary. So now the special session will be on the weeks of, from taking it from 18 to 6 weeks. The 6 weeks is an important number because that has been, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that 6 weeks is, it's doable in 2 other states. So there is already legal precedent that if it goes to 6 weeks, that even if the bill passes, that it will hold teeth because of Supreme Court decisions on 2 other states and other courts. So not related to the injunction, it will just now go into the weeks. So yes, they're going to come in fury. So to answer your question, what do? We need everyone in all the levels to bring some balance into what we have in Utah. It is important. Balance matters because I think, one, they have access to communicate with their constituency faster. You guys know this if you've been involved in some of those initiatives, and statewide initiatives are really hard, because it communicates different in Utah County than it communicates different in the west side of Salt Lake City than it is on the east side. So local elected officials, the more we can bring people that just use common sense and that care for other humans, I think will get us access to communicating better as we are going to continue to fight some of this. These are just battles, right? The war is still out there as we will continue fighting. But I will say, we have county council. County is huge. The county, Salt Lake County, just here alone, there are critical races on this county council seats, at large, that we need to come out and support. And you have all, 100, so half of the Senate and all House members, so 75 and 15 members up for re-election. On our caucus alone, we have half of us are up for re-election. So we have Kwan in 12, myself 10, and then Reby on 7. So that's half of our caucus. So if we lose 1 seat, that's devastating. We lose 2 seats, you're gone, right? What do you do? How do you function with 4 members? Those are real things. You're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel for one. There's a targeted race in Ogden against John Johnson. We need help on that one, right? People the numbers are looking really optimistic for that seat. Because of Ogden, right? Ogden and diversity. So we go back to this diversity. Ogden could be one of those places where we can pick up a seat. So we have a really good person that's running, and we're excited to support, efforts to see. We need more. It's really, really hard when you're, with 6 members out of 29. We just need balance. I think that's an important part of the conversation. And if we lose seats, that will be devastating. I believe that will be really, really bad for us.
Tristan, do we have a question from online?
Yes, we do. This is an excellent question coming from one of our Zoom viewers. She says, you mentioned in your talk getting people to speak up on the issues they care about and how it is difficult when in survival mode to respond. I think there is another important issue. I am taking classes at Salt Lake Community College, and I have found many young people have things to say, but they have no idea they can speak directly to representatives. or how to do this. How would you suggest we help young people and college students to really know that they can speak up and how to effectively do that?
Thank you for that question. So we, in Utah, we're unique. We're a small state, so we still are, we're what we consider a citizen legislature. And I would say even the ones that we may disagree with, I always encourage people to engage with their elected officials. And this is the right time, by the way, this time of the year. Session is chaos. It's almost impossible. Just so you get an idea, we have a 45-day session. And people always like, can you imagine if we have more days of damage that will come out of that? I'm like, yeah, man, that's a good point. But the reality is the state is growing. Our budget is $29.7 billion. And we balance that budget every year. That alone, that task is gigantic. And we do it in 45 days plus. We review 1,000 bills and pass about 500 of them. So, and the demand is just getting bigger. So realistically, our committees, we have committees where, we go from committees from 8 in the morning to 8 p.m. Democrats are in committees everywhere because we're such a small number that we have to cover all of them. So just logistically is almost humanly impossible to be like, let me take this phone. So session is a terrible, you always have to connect in session for bills, right? Like, Senator Escamilla, this bill is horrible, please vote no. And we will respond with our interns and stuff like, okay, or I will make a phone call. What are they talking about? It's my constituent. Always, so the first thing is, if you're going to do it during session, just know that the response and the ability to spend time with your legislator is going to be limited just because there's so many hours in the day. I'm being very realistic here. But the first thing you do is you have to put in your email. So emails, people respond to their emails. And now we have more, like the support staff or whatever. We're a part-time legislature, so we all have our full-time jobs on the side, and our families outside of being legislators. That's how it's designed. That's what we want, and that's the citizen legislature model. So we have professions, so we do things outside of our legislative life. But during session, we're 24/7 there. Just say, I'm your constituent, and always put where you live, because being a constituent, you'll have a priority. And we get thousands of emails. I'll prioritize first my constituents. They're my number one priority when I'm in session. And then you move into the next group, Utah residents. Outside of Utah, it's like, okay, good luck in your state. We're focusing in Utah. But now is the time to actually connect and get to know your legislators. So, by the way, most of us have our phones on those are our cell phones. I will say, send a text, introduce yourself. And during interim, because we go to the Capitol during interim, it's like 2 days a month. If you're in leadership, we're there for 4 or 5 days. I'm at the Capitol probably 2 days, 3 days a week, every week. Like it's a full time and a half. You can ask for 10 minutes to talk to them, Zoom meetings for 10 minutes. Just to introduce yourself, say, look, I'm your constituent. I want to introduce yourself and tell you what my priorities are. Now, knowing that every House member is up for re-election, this is a time to call them and be like, I need to understand where you are on these issues that matter to me, because I'll be voting and I'm your constituent. They will respond. Believe me, especially in election year, everyone wants to respond to that. And so get to know them. Even if you realize that you live in a district where you may not feel you're fully represented by your elected officials, I have great relationships with constituents that are Republicans in my district that may not necessarily agree 100% with me, but 90% of the bills that we're passing are, unanimous in the sense like we all come together collectively as a legislature. You usually see that 10% of the more controversial policy pieces. But I'm taking feedback from all my constituents, regardless of their political affiliation. I don't care who they are. They need to just tell me where they are, and I'll respond back. And I've learned, and we've done better pieces of legislation by collectively coming together. So don't be. A lot of people say, well, but I just do not fit with this elected official. He's horrible on this issue. I've seen him on TV. I don't like his position. I'm like, yeah, but he's voting 1,000 other bills that affect you. So don't you want to make sure you can at least convey? You may not agree on this one with your elected official, but you may be able to agree and provide feedback on these other ones. So especially younger people that are, I find them to have less patience, and they want a response within seconds. It's like, oh, he didn't answer now. I was like, no, he's probably working. It's like give her or him a minute. Or they want please answer in 3 sentences what this bill does. I'm like, oh no, it's a 500-page bill. I won't be able to put it in 3 sentences. I can try calling you and try to explain. So just be more open to the fact that the communication may look a little bit different, that there may be some generational changes on how we communicate, but always open. Another way to young people and students, it's election time. People love campaigns are happening. You may want to get to know your elected official by participating in their campaign, right? I mean, when you get excited about someone, you may want to go and get to know them. Campaign is a great time to be a volunteer in campaigns and get to know that person better, because you'll be with that person as they're walking and knocking doors and events. It's a way of younger people to get engaged. I love that part of campaigning.
Hand right there.
A little fun, but not fun. I'm sitting here as a ultra-conservative member of the public who comes from a small community in Salt Lake. And I'm a big Donald Trump advocate. And I'm sitting here wondering how I can convince Mark Ratheter that he should vote for Donald Trump. And so the dynamic of me thinking I'm right, and my hope focusing on getting my way, and my hopes will only be fulfilled if I get the other person who has a different set of values and a different set of hopes to do it my way. And Mark is there looking at me and just waiting to get into me with it. And so that dynamic is what's at play. Mm-hmm. And are we having the right types of conversation to overcome those conflicts?
I think what I've learned from interacting and having people that I care and deeply respect and love, understanding that we're not in the same place. That exercise alone is an exercise of being mature and being, to me, a good, for me personally, in my values, Christ-like person. But it's okay sometimes to say, we're gonna have to agree to disagree on this one. But take some space, because what's happening now that I've never seen before, and even if with an MPA, you do some political science and some of the classes that where you get to read some of the history of this country. Whereas we're in a unique place, because now the information and the words that are so hurtful are in your face. And we used to not do that, right? I think that's where some people are going to need some space. And I think that's okay, as long as it's clear that, you may proactively think that someone is a better candidate for a specific position. And no one, I don't think anyone 100% agrees with everything of everyone, because that's kind of like almost impossible. But to say, look, this is to me the best person for the position, but I understand. You may need to understand that person is proactively hurting this other person's family, loved ones, with the words they're saying, and it may be like because right now you can't say anything without being already in TikTok or in social media, right? So it is also a hard thing, because we used to be able to have more conversations and be more honest, and not thinking that it's going to be publicized and that they're going to cut half of it. And now you're worried that quote was not my entire quote. So I sometimes tell people, you're not hearing the rest of what was happening there. Not that I'm justifying the words that came out of someone's mouth, but it just now is really hard. So I would say, because of the toxicity of how, in a way, social media has added to the way we do business, including politics and including, unfortunately, public policy in some instances, which is very scary, because that's not how we should do public policy, that we need to be more respectful of people saying, I may need just more space. But you're right, we've changed. The dynamic has changed. It's not the same. My husband and I, we were listening to a podcast of this very, this is a U.S. senator. He's a U.S. senator. He was one of the senators that was leading the Republicans on the collaboration, negotiating the immigration bill, comprehensive immigration bill that they had. It was a great bill. Then it was all stopped in February by Donald Trump specifically. But part of what he was saying, it was fascinating. This guy is, I mean, I would love to have a meal with this guy. He was just so eloquent, to the point, on the policy, so calm. And he was saying, look, he's, for me, the best candidate, right? Like he was just saying, because they just recorded this podcast this week or last week. He's the best candidate for me. But I recognize I've been, he's from Oklahoma, I think. So like I was elected by my constituents in Oklahoma to fix a problem. Like I'm in Congress. I'm the elected official. I get to fix this problem. I don't want to get caught on this other stuff. So I appreciated how he said that in a way where he's a minister in his church. I mean, like he was I was like, oh, I can have a conversation with this gentleman. I can talk policy. And still we're going to leave thinking he's going to vote for Trump. I'm going to vote for Harris. And we can still work on policy. We can still have a conversation of decency. I will say it's just hard because there's stuff that was not permissible before that now is permissible of very, very hurtful wording. And we teach our kids that words are powerful, right? I mean, you remember at kindergarten, it's like, no, you don't say that. It's called filters. Like, no, you don't do that. To see adults acting like kids is where you're like, holy, like what happened? We just lost that control. So I would say it is different than it was with President Bush, with President, I mean, like if you think about like just historically where there was disagreements between Democrats and Republicans. So I can see how to change the tension of relationships with others, but recognizing that, I'm sorry if this is hurtful to you. Let me tell you why I find to be this the best choice for me or my family. But can we then let that go for a minute and still try to find some relationship for us? But it's hard. I respect people that they do it in their families. I mean, I have people say, no, in our families, our rule is we don't talk politics. In our families, we talk politics. I mean, my husband was elected 16 years in Arizona. Like, politics is a part of who we are as a community, as a family. But we have family members that think differently from us, right? That maybe vote more in a different way. But we still manage to just collectively agree that we want the best for all of us, and that at that point, maybe those conversations are not going to be the most constructive conversations at that point.
Are you telling me that I have to be more respectful of Mark? And
of his space, of Mark's space.
And more thoughtful and considerate of his perspective?
Right. I'm going to take the liberty of posing the last question.
Yes.
Problem, solution, observation, and a question. You made reference to the state legislature, 104 members, with a budget of $29.7 billion, the largest budget we've ever had.
Correct.
For a state population that's exceeding 3.3 million and the fastest growing state. So I perceive a problem of ignorance, of racism, and fear of change. What does it take to turn this around to address the problems like childcare that you've addressed? Does it take an act of God? Does it take a decision from the first presidency, since 90 to 91% of the legislature belong to the predominant church? Ongoing relentless faith. What does it take to make things better? Because you and I are eternal optimists.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And of course, that's a good professor. He just put me on the spot. I'm like, oh no, I remember that class. I think, it's just going to take an incredible amount of people being analytical for a change of how they're voting. I think there have been specific messages in the predominant church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that I belong to, where it's very clear where people should be aligning, at least to me. Like, there's no questions where they also, as you know, maybe more hesitant to taking national positions and so forth, but we're seeing more of that activism, I think, happening internally. But any citizen should be concerned who they're voting for. I mean, the reality is, when I look back into the number of how my colleagues get elected by how many people, those communities are voting for them. And in some districts, it's not by a small number. So I mean, somehow either the options are not, communicating. We need to do better to empower everyone to participate. Now, our voting participation is not as high as it should be. I think voting participation is critical. Presidential years bring more people out, which is great, because then you see actually is when better outcomes sometimes happen in the legislature. So I'm excited because we lost seats 2 years ago. So I think we're going to pick up some of those seats this time. Part of it is that presidential election. So when you see that there are trends where people participate more, people should be participating all the time. Off years, presidential years, no matter what. And two, the hardest part is communicating, like you said, childcare. I mean, like the pieces that no one talks about that are not like on the news, for people to realize that, okay, wait, how is this person affecting my ability to provide for my children, my rent, my housing, protecting my ability to have a job? I mean, like all of these pieces. So I think, how do we bring those issues that sometimes nobody talks about because they're maybe more boring or they're not as exotic as some of the stuff that's always on the news? It's going to be the challenge, but we need to do better in communicating that and not losing hope. And like I said, I mean, for me is when it gets very, very lonely is when I wonder, I'm like, where is the rest of the state? Because I believe people in Utah care for their neighbors, are good people. They just want, the best for their communities. How can we elect people that say or hurt people? So I'm hoping they're also watching. The problem is they're busy. They're with the 2 jobs. I mean, they're barely making it. They're like, my gosh, like you also want me to go and engage on this? But if they recognize just how much impact it will have if they don't, I think people will participate more. So we need to do better in communicating that.
Let's express appreciation to our speaker. Some quick announcements. Tonight, Joan wants me to make sure that everybody is aware that it's actually next week. Forgive me, I'm a week ahead, right, Joan? August 18th, Connect the Dots, the stories of Tim DeChristopher and Victor Poetas, who will be, the topic will be talking about their experiences and with regard to economic justice and legal justice. Also, service tonight, I believe, 5:30 here. Also, one more thing is next week is our last summer forum. It's August 18th. And our speaker is going to be Lanny Chapman. She is the Salt Lake County Clerk. Very important person. We have 29 county clerks in the state. As State Senator indicated, 1/3 of Utah's population is in this one county, Salt Lake County. So Lanny Chapman will be here to speak about how she does her job, how members of her staff do their job. The topic will be how the votes are counted, the role of the Salt Lake County Clerk's Office. That's next week on August 18th at 10 o'clock. And then I walk over here and I'm going to put out the eternal flame. But before I do, I remember some words from a Reverend William Sloan Coffin. He said, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. It's that simple. So you stand up and you speak out and you act and you vote, because your vote is your physical expression of your attitudes, beliefs, and values. So anything you can do to try to make things better in our community. So with that in mind, we're going to have opportunity to go next door for coffee and more conversation. And again, let's express appreciation again to State Senator Escamilla.